Good afternoon. My name is Audrey Hunsbet. I'm a senior from Princeton, New Jersey, studying financial management and French. I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker today. Bill Gertz is the national security correspondent for the Washington Times. He studied English literature at Washington College and journalism at George Washington University. A recipient of the Reed Irvine Award for Investigative Journalism from Accuracy in Media, Mr. Gertz has written for several publications, including Asia Times, Commentary, The Weekly Standard, and Air Force Magazine. He is the author of numerous books, including Betrayal, How the Clinton Administration Undermined American Security, The China Threat, How the People's Republic Targets America, Enemies, How America's Foes Steal Our Vital Secrets and How We Let It Happen, War and Peace in the Information Age, and most recently, Deceiving the Sky, Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy. His website, gertzfile.com, contains information about his reports, books, columns, and podcast. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gertz.
Thank you very much. Let me boot up the computer here real quick. Yeah, I've been a national security reporter for a very long time, and I've covered a lot of various things about national security, many of which are rather alarming. And people often ask me, they say, "Bill, how do you sleep at night?" And I tell them, I sleep like a baby. I get up and cry, go back to sleep, get up and cry. Artificial intelligence is one of those topics which, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, is a rather definitely a alarming topic to discuss. So I'm going to discuss today the Chinese Communist Party's use of artificial intelligence to impose an unprecedented level of totalitarian control over China's 1.4 billion people. The party, some 40 years ago, adopted a Marxist process that they call social cybernetics. It's the application of technology and computers for maintaining the CCP in power by stamping out all opposition and then advancing communism around the world. These goals have really come into sharp focus under the regime of Chinese Supreme Leader Xi Jinping, who, since coming to power in 2012, has made data-driven technology a strategic weapon, not just for maintaining the power of the CCP, but ultimately controlling the entire population. An important point about this danger is that it is not simply a problem for China. Beyond internal control, the CCP regards AI as a vital strategic enabler for advancing its vision. Well, what is that vision? The vision is driven by the ideology of Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics, which is a blend of traditional communism infused with jingoistic nationalism. China is using AI as both a tool for the creation of a new communist man at home and for a massive international campaign to clone the Chinese communist system worldwide with Beijing at its center. Go here. I like to use PowerPoints. I'll go back here. This military force here is the People's Armed Police. It's almost as large as the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, and it is a military force for internal security control. And I thought it was appropriate to start out with a picture of that. As I said, the new and rapidly advancing AI technology is also boosting the CCP's armed wing, which is the People's Liberation Army. It's not a national army. It's literally a party army. Its job is not to defend the nation, but to protect the ruling Chinese Communist Party. And they're getting ready for both a conventional war and a strategic war with their main ideological enemy, which is the United States and its allies. As Mao declared, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. So that's what's really motivating the Chinese Communist Party. This control system that they've established is truly alarming. Its main feature is an array of activities fueled by hundreds of millions of cameras, increasingly powered by AI, surveillance technology, and capable of instantly identifying people by their faces, by the way they walk, by their voices, their frequent interaction with mobile devices, and even by the clothes that they're wearing. With coming advances in AI, the Chinese mass control mechanism is pursuing even more disconcerting capabilities, such as the ability to remotely measure the emotional state of people. The visual facial recognition wasn't enough. They want to be able to know what people's emotions are feeling so that they can stamp out any kind of dissent or opposition. And the ultimate cutting-edge AI control weapon that the CCP is very actively pursuing is a combination of this socialist cybernetics with neuroscience. The objective is ultimately to remotely control and influence the human brain and the thinking and cognition of entire populations. Recently, the US government outlined the danger of AI in an executive order, and they warned that this technology is developing incredibly fast, much faster than earlier technologies. And an example was, by 2018, researchers had found the structure of about 150,000 proteins. Using Google's DeepMind AI system, by 2022, researchers had been able to uncover the structure of hundreds of millions of proteins. Applied to the technology of human control in China, this rapidly expanding technology power means the CCP will soon have the ability to rigidly exercise totalitarian control. And operations are underway by China to export this nightmare control system globally. With the advance of AI, it will be increasing by orders of magnitude the power of the system. This is not a theoretical danger. This is real and happening right now. Briefly, I want to talk a little bit about how AI works. I think it's useful to understand this. Anyway, it's an advanced technology. It's not easy to understand. But first of all, there are 4 key elements. There's masses of data. There's increasingly rapid computing power. Then there's algorithms or special computer processes. And then there's human domain. Trillions and quadrillions of data points are now available electronically. What AI developers call compute, or advanced ultra-high-speed computer power, driven by super powerful microchips that can process that data at astonishing speeds, are now being used to make sense of this data and then apply it to various processes. Next are algorithms, perhaps the most important element of AI. Algorithms are referred to as a if-then process. If X happens, then do Y. AI was initially developed and designed to make decisions. Algorithms now can make billions of decisions near instantaneously. And last is what computer scientists call domain expertise. And this was once the sole province of humans who analyze and know the data sources and limitations of data. In the AI domain, domain expertise is diminishing in importance as AI is becoming more capable of discerning these elements by itself. And they use something called generative adversarial networks. It's basically 2 various supercomputers. One is a generator of information, the other is a discriminator, and the information is then shared, and that's how you train an AI model. That's how these AI models learn how to do things. They take the masses of data, they use the algorithms on them, they crunch it with the high-speed computers, and then they actually learn about it, and they call it the AI model. Next, based on the title of my talk today, I want to talk about the question of whether China is a totalitarian state. Some argue that it's not, mostly the result of Chinese influence. Some may challenge my definition and say that the CCP is actually its rule is actually authoritarian. But here's why I say the system is totalitarian. And it's based on a book by 2 scholars, Karl Friedrich and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor during the Carter years. They provided a clear definition of totalitarianism, which fits the Chinese Communist Party and its rule in China as a T. This was in their 1965 book called The Totalitarian Dictatorship and Autocracy. First, the CCP regime operates under an official ideology, and that ideology is intended to achieve a perfected state of humankind. In China's case, the grandiose vision of what Xi Jinping calls the community of shared human destiny. Sounds rather vanilla, but it's actually a code for Chinese communist ideology to dominate the world. Then there is a single hierarchical mass party, now of 98 million members, that's the CCP, that rigidly controls the state bureaucracy and is led by a dictator. And there is a monopoly on the means of mass communications. That is the tightly controlled and now AI-powered communications and propaganda system of Chinese state media. The People's Republic of China is also defined as a totalitarian state by its system of police and intelligence control, unconstrained by the rule of law and driven by absolute authority imposed over the entire country. So we're really at the early stages of what I would call the AI tech era, and it's still not clear what impact it's going to have, but it's certainly going to be a monumental impact. I remember writing a story in 2017 on a report by Harvard's Balfour Center, and it was funded by the U.S. Intelligence Research Agency. Even then, in 2017, the report described AI as a rapidly developing advanced technology that will have multiple national security and civilian impacts. The report then offered a really alarming warning that artificial intelligence had the potential to spin out of control with disastrous results. Here's a quote: "Speculative but plausible hypotheses suggest that general AI, and especially superintelligence systems, pose a potentially existential threat to humanity." Overwrought? Maybe, maybe not. Today, we're really in the midst of an ideological battle over AI and its dominance and the standards. It is going to come down to whether the Chinese totalitarian-based AI model wins or the American-led democratic and freedom-loving AI model wins. This is really a scientific high-tech war underway. As I mentioned, for China, AI is a strategic tool that is not primarily designed to make life better for the Chinese people or the nation. That may be a secondary effect. The main purpose of AI, under Xi Jinping's view, is solely to maintain an iron grip on power for the CCP. It's essential to understand this. Many experts, even some within the new Trump administration, don't grasp this fact. History has shown that data collected by governments can be misused for horrendous means. Early in the 20th century, census takers in Europe asked respondents to identify their religious faith. That data later helped Nazi SS troops locate Jews in the nations they occupied during World War II and send the Jews off in extermination camps. A modern-day example of this similar genocide is underway by CCP authorities in Xinjiang, in Western China, where ethnic Uyghurs and other minorities are being systematically imprisoned and culturally neutralized using AI tech fused with ruthless police and intelligence power. Xinjiang, as well as neighboring Tibet are test cases of China's use of AI for repression and ultimately totalitarian control. The Uyghurs and Tibetans are being imprisoned, tortured, ostensibly by Chinese authorities in a bid to counter Islamic terrorism. The State Department declared the case of the Uyghurs in 2020 was taking place and correctly called it a genocide. Tibetans as well are being systematically reprogrammed through CCP's social cybernetics. From a human rights point of view, China will further adapt AI use more quickly and with little or no ethical constraints, as compared to the West, where Judeo-Christian value systems that often guide our policies and until recently viewed people as intrinsically connected to God. As evidence, the CCP already has mandated that all companies in China engaging in AI research and applications must make sure that all AI technology conforms to socialist values. This was passed in July of 2023 when the China Cyberspace Administration and 7 other agencies, including the intelligence services, basically endorsed this regulation that said that all 100 companies have to develop and apply communist ideology. They state that the regulation states that those providing AI must adhere to socialist core values and must not generate content that incites subversion and state power and overthrowing the socialist system. The CCP really fears AI, and that's why they're very much aggressively trying to control it. And the reason is basically they believe that AI could eventually unfold the facts and truth about its false ideology, that it doesn't produce benefits for humanity. And history is not on a march to the ideal workers' paradise. And they fear that machines, AI-powered machines, are actually going to overthrow the communist system. So their drive for AI is going to be very limited as long as it's going to be constrained by this. I wrote about this constraints last week in my Washington Times column regarding the new app DeepSeek, which some people are jokingly referred to as Deep CCP. I got a hold of an analysis from a Silicon Valley firm that said that as a Chinese company, DeepSeek is beholden to CCP policy, and this is reflected even in an analysis of its open source model, and it raises concerns about censorship and influence operations. For example, DeepSeek was cleverly prompted with a question related to Beijing's arch rival, the democratic-ruled island of Taiwan. In response, DeepSeek replied that China is a unified, multi-ethnic country, and Taiwan has always been an unalienable part of China since ancient times. The full answer that DeepSeek produced was verbatim what the Chinese Foreign Ministry propaganda churns out regarding Taiwan, that they oppose independence, that there's only one China, that they promote peaceful development, and they are going to achieve the complete reunification of the motherland. So the Silicon Valley analysis, the security company, said that the canned answer shows that the censorship feature of the app supersedes the true and accurate reasoning function of their AI model. In other words, it's not a good model. Let's go to mass data collection. These are some of the threats posed by, as I mentioned earlier, promoting communism. If we don't stop it, it's not going to be the world is not going to be a very good place for our children and grandchildren. They want to do this through information and influence, and they're exporting this system throughout the world. And they're doing this through the Global Security Initiative, which I'll mention a little bit later. Here we go. Xi Jinping, high-tech totalitarian. He is the person that is behind this system. And so we need to understand a little bit about Xi Jinping. He's General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. He's also the chairman of the Central Military Commission. That is, the power of the political power grows out of the barrel of the gun. This is what controls the military. And last, he's president of the country. Our media will not report these other titles, and by style have to refer to him as president. But his real power comes from being the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, which really, in that position since 2012, he has obtained more power and purged more of his rivals than anyone other than Mao. He was a princeling. He's a princeling, which they call the sons and daughters of early communist leaders. And he rose to power after the Cultural Revolution. So he went through the Cultural Revolution, which was a mass insanity in China that that Mao sought to destroy both the Communist Party and traditional Chinese culture. And it created unbelievable insanity, basically. Most of those who went through the Cultural Revolution came out against communism, or at least saying that they don't want to go through that again. Not Xi Jinping. He emerged from the Cultural Revolution as even more ideological and a true believer in Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. And I say true believer because one of his university thesis was on scientific socialism. But be honest, there's nothing scientific about Marxism-Leninism. All of Marx's predictions have failed, and the Leninist system doesn't produce anything but misery and tyranny and mass death. Yet he's revitalized this ideology, and he's using high technology to do it. Okay. So Xi and other Chinese leaders believe that modern information technology will be the ultimate solution for holding on to power and control by automating security systems with networks of sensors and masses of data that are providing ubiquitous observation of any opposition, real or perceived. Mass surveillance in China today has become nearly instantaneous with the help of AI. In huge cities, and less so in more remote regions, the regime is now capable of detecting minute changes in a person's behavior through data supplied by this mass surveillance system. It's really the nightmare of George Orwell's novel 1984 come to life, a system that controls all information to sometimes absurd ends, the absurd end being Xi Jinping as Winnie the Pooh. The CCP bans all discussion of the character of Winnie the Pooh after China's often boisterous and online netizens used it as a proxy to criticize Xi, who slightly resembles him. Xi as Pooh is an example of some of the indirect methods that creatively are used by the Chinese people to criticize and make fun of the despised CCP. And even censors focus on these. They have keywords, anything that can possibly affect the leader or other than that is used. You know, analysts of China say that Orwell's 1984 is less of an influence than a 1921 Russian novel called We. It's the story of a futuristic city-state populated by cheerful citizens named only by their alphanumeric code. These people spend their entire life dominated by a mathematical equation controlled by a dictator known as the benefactor. Well, today, the real-world technology-driven benefactor who has made clear his ambitions are global is Xi Jinping. In 2016, he said in a speech marking the 95th anniversary of the CCP that history is not over and that Western democracy is not the endpoint of human ideological development. The Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people are full of confidence that they can provide a China solution to humanity's search for better systems. Echoes there of the final solution, no doubt, from Hitler. Basically, those embracing the solution include regimes already in line with the autocratic or totalitarian controls, such as Russia, North Korea, and Iran. They're in fact becoming kind of an entente, a loose alliance of nations led by China. There's others like Cuba, Saudi Arabia, the Maduro regime in Venezuela, and hybrid regimes in Uganda and Africa and South America that are buying or showing interest in setting up this CCP model of control. Companies like Huawei Technologies are going to these countries and literally giving away telephone systems that will allow totalitarian controls to be imposed in the future. Even some of the city governments in advanced democracies like France and Germany are toying with elements of the Chinese solution. And in the United States, unfortunately, adopted some of these elements of the China model during the pandemic. That's when federal, state, and local governments seized unprecedented emergency powers in a largely failed bid to halt the spread of COVID-19. So let's look at COVID-19 in China. During the pandemic, the Chinese initially failed in their decade-long surveillance system. They were unable to identify the first victim of COVID. They couldn't track where it came from. Of course, we don't know that net, but we know that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, again, for years now, our intelligence services only recently decided that, yeah, it came from a lab. But basically, they were unable to, there were a lot of failures with it. But Once, they also failed to halt the travel from China, which you would have thought with their control system they would have been able to do. Perhaps they wanted to spread the virus anyway so that China was not the only one experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. But gradually, the CCP worked against the virus with draconian lockdowns. They were sealing the apartments of people, forcing people into health places. And as the death tolls outside China climbed to what would ultimately be 7 million deaths, COVID-19 ultimately fortified the CCP's belief in its model of seeking total control and the indispensable value of pervasive state surveillance. That is, until riots broke out. And that's when the steam began to blow in the China repression in Shanghai and other places. And interestingly, the CCP backed off right away from what they call the zero COVID policy, and they loosened up. Document 9. So Xi Jinping's vision for this, what they call CCP rejuvenation and world supremacy, was first outlined in a 2012 speech extolling what he called the China dream. I call it the China nightmare. It was kind of based on the American dream, only based on Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. The context for that was Xi denounced the color revolutions that brought down the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe at the end of the Cold War, and then expanded to the 2010 Arab Spring in North Africa and the Middle East, with the help of Facebook and other social media platforms. The Chinese immediately blamed it on the CIA, which wasn't true. So Facebook and Twitter were then blocked in China as a result. But for a while in China, in the early 2000s, there actually was a vibrant Chinese internet where people could actually criticize, maybe indirectly, maybe through proxies like Winnie the Pooh and other things. That all changed by 2012 when Xi came in. And then we learned from this document that was published in 2013 called Document Number 9. It was distributed among senior officials, and it stated that threats to CCP control include Western constitutional democracy, universal values, civil society, neoliberalism, freedom of the press, and any criticism of the party's version of history. Anti-communist forces, the document said, had the goal of using democracy to undermine the party's leadership, abolish the people's democracy, and bring about a change of allegiance by bringing Western political systems to China. This important communique was the beginning of the emergence of the high-tech totalitarian state of today, and the state's drive to destroy the rest of the democratic world in pursuit of CCP global dominance. In 2013, Xi also declared that big data is a free resource for industrialized societies, and he said, whoever gets control of the data controls the initiative. So he understood very early on that the power of big data. It was only when it was combined with high-speed computing and the software of algorithms that we now have the AI-powered totalitarian system. Thus began, back in 2013, was stepping up the massive technology and data acquisition from the United States that's basically continued uninterrupted in the United States for the last 10 years. And there's been no effective response from the United States or Western nation. And that includes both Republican and Democratic administrations from the late 80s through the Biden administration. By 2016, Xi had unveiled a national plan for massive data collection, and in 2017 launched a companion program, a crash program for artificial intelligence. The program called for joining state and private sectors to build a $150 billion AI industry. The goal is to transform China into an AI-driven powerhouse by 2030. That's less than 5 years from now. China's plan is dual-hatted. It focuses on Chinese national security objectives and also the imposition of social controls. They do it through what they call smart cities, which are wired so that they can absorb more data and find opponents. and also social governance, which is a euphemism for communist control. I recently wrote about an open source study by a group of former officials who stated that Chinese military writings revealed how TikTok, the hugely popular video app, was being used by the People's Liberation Army as a key tool for influencing American youth, particularly university students. And the objective is getting them to lower their resistance and ultimately to accept Chinese communism. This is taking place right now in most of the universities in the United States. During the Biden administration, the Chinese Communist Party brushed off the announced U.S. policy of trying to both compete and cooperate with China. They didn't cooperate at all. 95% of what the Chinese did was basically block the U.S. from dealing with any issues, whether that's Russia, climate change, terrorism, or North Korea's nuclear program. Its version of competition, in reality, was Cold War-style ideological and information warfare. And yet, most of the government was not aware of this. I have a neighbor who taught in China, and he told me that the school books in China are teaching students that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when China is going to go to war with the United States. They are on a war footing, and we haven't really come to fully grasp that. Okay, let's go to... This here is Chen Shui-sen. I describe him as the father of China's techno-totalitarian control. Okay, he is an interesting character. He came to the United States. He was a Chinese national. He came to the United States in the 1930s, before the Chinese communists took over in 1949. And he went to MIT and Cal Poly, and he was a rocket engineer and helped develop US missiles. But he was also a cybernetic specialist who, more than any other person, helped build this high-tech control system. He was deported back to China in 1955 after being monitored by the FBI during the anti-communist period of the 1950s. It was Chen working together with a protege named Sung Jong, who more than any other scientist theorized and then developed this idea of Marxist social controls through technology. Chen and Sung wrote a book stating that under the conditions of socialism, the new science will eventually be born. It is social cybernetics. Social cybernetics won't work in capitalist societies, they argued, because those systems are too vulnerable to the anarchy of market forces. But communist systems are different. And they said, could be engineered to be self-correcting. They proposed a guidance system for society that used similar cybernetic feedback concepts used by missiles to transmit telemetry signals during test flights, and also used by precision-guided missiles today to find their targets. Their book on social control theory was embraced by the post-Mao leader Deng Xiaoping. Deng was more pragmatic, but still communist, and known for his policies of hiding capabilities and biding time while China recovered from the Cultural Revolution and modernized. It was those policies that really led China to its current level of prosperity, which are now being undone as Xi Jinping is re-ideologizing China. The system in China is large and complex, and Chinese society needed predictive models, Chen said, and those required gathering massive amounts of data and using emerging technologies back in the 80s, which were computers. And so after masses of pro-democracy protesters flooded Beijing's Tiananmen Square in 1989, spurred by the fall of the Berlin Wall, Deng would eventually call in PLA troops for what would be a brutal massacre of thousands of unarmed civilians by PLA troops. It was after this that Chen's mass surveillance program took off. He sold the system to the CCP at a time calling for a meta-synthetic approach to social engineering that would unite the natural and social sciences into a new discipline and usher the socialist dream of a Chinese communist ideal world. And so they led to a system called grid management, where this was the first time they went into neighborhoods and started mapping grids on how to control the population. The next was they developed something called the Golden Shield, which was the precursor to the Great Firewall of China. And this was the beginning point of filtering and controlling the internet. They also set up a database for the police so that they could, basically, they had information, personal information, ID numbers, on every single adult in the entire country. Another goal was stated in a CCP report, was called the Action Plan to Promote the Development of Big Data. And that sought to link advances in big data to social governance, which is another euphemism. I mentioned about the Uyghurs. I'm going to pass over that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what is called the social credit system. Okay, let's see if I have one of that. Okay, so unlike the mass repression, death, and imprisonment that's taking place in Western China against the Uyghurs, China used a much more subtle and sophisticated totalitarian control mechanism for the wealthy megacities in the eastern part of the country. And they call this the social credit system. It's basically a way to avoid having to impose that. It's a coercive measure. And how does it work? Well, basically, they copied the credit system of the US financial system. So when you get a credit report, or when you're going to take out a mortgage or buy a car, they'll do a credit check on you. The Chinese took that model and turned it into a Marxist-Leninist tool for controlling and coercing the population in the large megacities of the eastern part of China. Basically, it was outlined in a government document in 2014. It seeks to allow the trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. I think that kind of captures what they were up to. Social crimes under this credit plan can range from criticizing the party and its leaders to not paying taxes. Minor offenses can be for seemingly innocuous activities such as smoking, seemingly innocuous activities like smoking or not paying parking tickets. The government also bragged that once discredited, limited everywhere. So low credit with communist authorities is designed to be life-changing and limit already constrained freedoms even further. For example, social credit controls are being used to prevent the discredited from buying insurance, real estate, or financial investments. If a company scores low, the company will be barred from bidding on a project or issuing corporate bonds. The social credit system is becoming even more repressive as the security organs are now applying artificial intelligence and large data sets to the monitoring program. It makes it easier to identify regime opponents and punish them as a result. I mentioned the Great Firewall. I'm coming to the end here. Yes, the Great Firewall, this is again to block information from both coming in to China, free and open information, and also blocking information from going out. So AI is able to do this in a much more rapid way than human censors. The 50-cent army, troll armies, and other censors, they have tens of thousands of censors in China that do this. With AI, basically, this technology can scan the entire internet much quicker than these people and send alerts to them, who then move in, and again, using the other technology, can take action. Also, I mentioned this here, religious freedom as well continues to be severely restricted by the officially atheist Communist Party. AI power is focused on identifying and neutralizing all unofficial believers, and there are tens of millions of them in China. And there are organizations which are viewed as rivals to the CCP power. Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus are being denied the fundamental right of freedom of worship, and identifying the unofficial believers is being increased by AI. New AI dangers. I'm going to sum up here with the last and most alarming one that I mentioned early on, and that's the combination of social cybernetics with what is called neurostrike or cognitive warfare. This, to me, is one of the most dangerous CCP pursuits in control. And this term, neurostrike, was coined by the late Robert McCreight, he called these neurostrike weapons. Bob was a source of mine, a friend, and a great American. He was also former Special Operations Commando, and a former State Department arms control expert. He understood, and this was done through analyzing Chinese military writings, that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is developing, with the assistance of AI, high-technology weapons designed to disrupt brain functions and influence government leaders and even entire populations as part of what they call cognitive warfare. And I can go into that in a little more detail later on, but I'm running out of time, so I want to sum up here now. Also a word on United Front Work Department, I'll mention very quickly. I just went to a hearing last week on Chinese influence operations, which again have not been adequately addressed by our government at any level. And they're taking place at the local, state, and federal government level through businesses, through universities. It's a massive operation. And this hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week, the estimates are that the Chinese are spending $3 billion to $8 billion annually to subvert and undermine the United States and other Western democracies. This is a huge threat. In conclusion, we've got to defeat the Chinese Communist Party, just as we defeated the Soviet Communist Party during the Cold War. There's going to be no solution. There's going to be no cooperation. There's going to be no competition. We are locked in an ideological war with the Chinese Communist Party. We can do it. Our technology can do it. We have special technologies that, and the military is working on this. They call it left of launch. It's the ability to get inside of a strategic nuclear missile silo and subvert the command and control system so that when the button is pressed to launch a nuclear missile, nothing happens. Similar technology and innovation, I believe, can be used to counter the Chinese AI threat. We also need much greater cooperation among other nations. We're trying to keep the advanced artificial intelligence computer chips out of the hands of the Chinese. They're doing very creative ways to get other countries to buy them for them, to use them. There was just a recent report on DeepSeek, how they managed to develop AI without the advanced chip by partnering chips and using multiple chips in different and unique ways. We need what they had during the Cold War against the Soviet Union was COCOM, the Coordinating Committee on Multilateral Export Controls. And that was an allied effort to prevent the Soviet Union from getting the technology that they could use to threaten the West. Last, I'll just say that this is not a pretty picture that I've painted, and I meant it to be, we need to wake up to what America and the free world are facing and recognize the danger. Our task is first to understand clearly what we are up against in Chinese high-tech totalitarianism, and then we've got to take the necessary action to defeat this threat before it's too late. Our nation's future depends on it. And I want to close with a quote from Ronald Reagan in 1961, and he said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it down to them with well-fought lessons of how they, in their lifetime, must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like when America was free." Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gertz. We now have time for Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way to a microphone. Student questions will be given preference.
Thank you very much for that very alarming presentation. If that doesn't scare the crap out of you, I don't know what the hell does. A statement, two questions. Statement is kind of an oxymoron to call AI if you don't give it all the data that it could use. Question, do you see a virtual war between their AI and our AI?
I do, and I kind of touched on that in my remarks. Right now, what China is doing is offering their artificial intelligence in an open source format. And the reason they're doing that is that they want the world to adopt their model of AI, which again, contains these very strong ideological constraints. Additionally, there is an international organization that sets standards, and unfortunately, standards for things like artificial intelligence, including brain-computer interface. And the Chinese are dominating those international forums. The US has been out to lunch during the Biden administration and has neglected pressuring to maintain that our version, our values-based artificial intelligence becomes the standard. And the reason is strategic for the Chinese. They want the world to adopt weak standards for artificial intelligence, then they will develop stronger standards secretly and then use those to be able to defeat and undermine the rest of the artificial intelligence used by the world.
Thank you so much for speaking here today. Is the Chinese Communist Party facing any major obstacles or limitations in their adaptation of AI for totalitarian control? The way the race is going now, and I heard a presentation by a recently retired White House official who dealt with this issue, and he said that in terms of the capabilities of artificial intelligence, the battle is the Chinese make advances here, the US makes advances here, but generally the US is slightly ahead. And we're trying to maintain that lead, again, because of the ideological component about this battle. The US hasn't quite understood that we're facing an existential threat from the Chinese Communist Party and its ideology. They're on the march around the world. They're aggressively buying up countries, literally, in Africa and in South America, and little is being done to push back against that. And it's hopeful. We have a new administration under the Trump administration. We're hoping that that can change things and we can start to have a better understanding of what we're really up against. But as I mentioned in my remarks, even some of the new Trump administration people don't get it. They don't quite grasp the ideological dimension we're facing in the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping. This is really a big problem that we need to work on.
Yesterday's conversation, starting with the first speaker, talked about critical thinking and artificial intelligence, and that computers don't do really critical thinking. So my question is, doesn't this all start with how we educate our kids, starting in K through 12, in terms of being able to do critical thinking so that they can, if you will, defeat the computers? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I would say we have a crisis in the American education system, and that is the result of more than 2 decades of what I would regard as Marxist or neo-Marxist infiltration, to the point where we really need to educate our students to really what's going on. I mean, I do a podcast that's called Victory Over Communism, and it's an examination of Chinese communist ideology and a critique and counterproposal with a Judeo-Christian counterproposal, and also American Marxism. And for example, I just did a piece on the infiltration of Marxism within the state of California, which
became fairly obvious during the recent fires when everything was mishandled by the government leaders and no water was coming out of fire hydrants, the reservoir needed for fire hydrants. But within the education system, it needs to be totally retooled. And we need to understand, I'm convinced from doing this podcast that there won't be any progress, real progress on social and solving social issues and problems until we really debunk and clearly get rid of the Marxist ideology. It's infiltrated in so many facets of our society. It's become almost cultural. You see it in movies. You hear it from business people. You see it even in sports. It's a crisis of failing to understand that if we don't get back to original American values that really made this country, that we don't have a future. And it's like I said, it's really a crisis.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So on the topic of DeepSeek, it was announced within the past 2 weeks that it only takes roughly $6 million to develop that AI tool, whereas ChatGPT takes about $100 million. So it's a big difference, and the stock market took a dip after that. So I guess what I was wondering is, do you see DeepSeek being a major global competitor in the AI market, or does China have other plans for maybe a different technology in mind? Thank you.
I think they're taking a multi-front approach to AI. And again, they really want to be able to develop AI with their system in mind, with the China solution system in mind. They want AI to be able to advance that, and they're using it through many different means. I'm a little skeptical about the reports on DeepSeek. They said that it was done, again, in a practical way, and they're hyping that, I think, a lot. But everything that comes out of China, you have to take with a major grain of salt. They're experts at strategic deception. They're experts at manipulating data and manipulating perceptions. And so we'll have to wait and see how they do it. One area that I would mention that is critical is in the area of quantum encryption. And that's another race that's behind the scenes. It's totally different. But quantum encryption would allow for absolutely unbreakable security controls over digital means and electronic means. And if China was able to do that, we again would be in a very difficult situation of being able to counter their artificial intelligence drive.
I'd like to thank you for your talk here and your years of work that you put in before you came here. I have a series of some questions. What's the probability 2027 China attacking Taiwan? And I see parallels between what you said today, the cognitive warfare and the Havana symptom. Is there any parallels between that? And what can we do as American citizens to stop this existential threat of China?
Okay, let's see if I can get him. First was on 2027. This is something I cover on an almost daily basis, but we have had several commanders, four-star admirals of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, say that Xi Jinping, despite declaring that it wants peaceful reunification with Taiwan, has told his forces to be ready to use military force against Taiwan by 2027. That is happening. And I was recently out in PACOM, and I got a background briefing there, and I was told that this is very real. The threat is serious. They're not yet ready for the 2027 period, but they're making inroads to it, and they're doing it in a very, very effective way with weapon systems that we have no counter for, like hypersonic missiles that travel faster than our anti-missile interceptors, like massive cyber capabilities, like a massive nuclear buildup. It's all designed to prevent the United States from defending Taiwan so that they can force a capitulation of the democratic regime there. Deterrence needs to be strengthened there. We haven't moved enough forces or munitions there to deter them. Havana syndrome, I could have mentioned that in my remarks. one of the directed energy weapons, again, this is a debate that's underway right now within the intelligence community, Havana syndrome, or what's also known as anomalous health incidents, have been affecting our diplomats and intelligence personnel and some military attachés overseas. They suffer some type of traumatic brain injury, and they don't know where it's coming from, but it's clear to most observers, just like the virus that came from the Wuhan lab, that some type of directed energy is involved. And yet, our intelligence services issued a complete fabrication in an analysis, a public analysis, said that we think it's very unlikely that a foreign adversary is behind this. And what do they think happened? They think it's from environmental factors or psychological factors, which has totally upset the victims who are experiencing these traumatic injuries. So that is clearly a potential. It's not often, the reason it's called Havana syndrome is because people felt they heard this sound and then suffered brain injuries after it. Happened at the US Embassy in Havana. It's also happened in China. There is also suspicions that the Russians may have done this. I know from my own reporting that China is developing directed energy weapons designed to injure and change people's perception. It can be, like I say, damaging your ability to think. For military leaders, it would be preventing them from being able to make the kind of command decisions when they're involved in military operations. And so that's a very real thing. Last one was?
What can we do to stop?
Yeah, I think my solution is there will be no peace as long as the Chinese Communist Party is in power in China and working to become the dominant power in the world. The national rejuvenation is not a national revival in China. It's placing China as the center of human civilization. And there's one obstacle for China doing that, and it's the United States. And we clearly have our divisions, we have our differences, we have a new administration, hopefully that we can unite around this, but we really need to focus. The war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, they're really distraction from what we call the main thing. We've got to focus. It's going to take all of America's energy, power, influence, resources to deal with this threat coming from China.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you for your talk. If I understand correctly, your argument against the CPP as far as what we can do about it is to innovate on our own side. However, from what I understand, a lot of our companies, our American companies, have been building their technology in support of what the CPP is doing, and we have corporations that are aiding the CPP in what they've been developing. How is it that we can ensure that our side is building things based on the right ideas and the right values? And how do we prevent ourselves from becoming victims of that which is being created by the use of our own technology?
Yeah, the way I would answer that is, first in one word, decouple from communist China. And we're not doing that. And you know, when I wrote my first China book in 2000, the reason that I wrote it, got interested in the subject, was I went to the Defense Intelligence Agency and they gave me a background briefing on the People's Liberation Army. And I've told this story before, but after the briefing, a colonel said, the general would like to see you. And the general was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he told me, we sat in a windowless conference room, and he said, Bill, China's not a threat. And I said, they have nuclear weapons, they're a communist dictatorship, they don't like the United States, why? And his answer to me, and I'm paraphrasing, was, because they've told us they're not a threat. So I was really shocked, and I said, I could understand policymakers spinning a reporter or even civilian intelligence people, but for the top military intelligence guy to do it. Anyway, my point there is that for 40 years, the US policy was China is not a threat. It was stated in executive orders. You call China a threat, you're a warmonger or a zealot, but the fact of the matter is we had this policy of ignoring their human rights violations, ignoring their nuclear arms proliferation, ignoring their support for rogue regimes, all because it was based on the false notion that if we just traded with China and that if we ignored their bad behavior, that this would have a moderating influence and lead to political liberalization and ultimately a democratic China. It was an utter failure. And now we've created a Leviathan that's trying to take over the world. And we're stuck because we've outsourced so much of our economy to China, our industry. And now, if we were to totally decouple, we would be shooting ourselves in the leg, in the foot. And we need to find a way to gradually and carefully, and China's doing this as well, not surprisingly, they're trying to decouple from the United States. We're really in the early stages of Cold War 2.0, and I think that we need to do that, and we need to educate both our population and our leadership to what we're up against, and that's what I'm trying to do in my books and my reporting and speeches like this. And I hope that we can wake up before it's too late.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Gertz.
Thank you all very much. Okay.